Hey, Bill Gross here, the LA probate expert, and I often interview industry experts to help bring best information to help us make more money and importantly, build our wealth. And today I have attorney April Rosenberry, who is on staff at EP Wealth Advisors in the San Diego market and works there as, well, I'll let her describe that. So April, what's your role at EP Wealth Advisors? What do you do specifically?
Specifically, myself and my team of attorneys in-house, we talk to clients and answer all the different kinds of estate planning questions that might come up. So in summation, we provide peace of mind.
Well, how about that peace of mind? It sounds like a real bargain deal. So give us a little background. I know that previously you worked at a law firm. Give me a little background. Where did you grow up? And then what kind of prompted you to get into law? And then how did you end up here at EP?
So I grew up in the Los Angeles area, original Valley girl here.
Wow. What high school?
Reseda High.
Wow,
So
that's legitimate Valley.
legitimate. I say for sure, like totally all the time. And so grew up in Los Angeles. My undergrad is in accounting. I was going to be a CPA, took all of the requisite courses at Cal State Northridge, and I had to take a law class and loved it. And so decided I want to be a lawyer. And when I went to law school, talked to some professors who said, hey, if you have an accounting undergrad, you could be a tax attorney. I had never heard of such a thing and took some courses, loved it. And then went on to practice for about 24 years in mergers and acquisitions. So I'm licensed in California and New York, so did a lot of M&A work. And then a lot of work for athletes in Orange County. So lots of baseball stars doing lots of interesting tax planning. And with all that good work, I realized all these business transactions, no one has an estate plan. So got into estate planning and did a lot of law firm work and then litigation around estate planning.
Amazing how many people don't have an estate plan. Or as I say to them, you have an estate plan. Either you create one on your own or the state of California will be glad to create one for you.
That's right. That's exactly right. I say the only difference between those two plans is who's deciding. It's either you or a judge.
Yeah, and the judge process looks a lot like the DMV. It's just not that customer service oriented.
That's right. In my practice, when clients say, oh, I'll just let the learned judge decide, nothing against learned judges, but they are a very busy group of learned attorneys. And
Right.
so it's very hard to get a deep dive into everyone's particular family without full-blown litigation. So really, it's better for you to decide than leave it up to the 5 minutes that you get to talk to a judge.
It's funny you say that. I don't know if you've done much trial work in probate court specifically, but I up until COVID, I went every day to probate court in Los Angeles. That's how I did my business. And I always said to people, if you go one morning for like half an hour and watch probate court, you would do everything you can to ever avoid going there again. It's just, I loved it for business, but for a customer. So let's talk about that. What's the difference of the outcome? Somebody has, let's say, a modest house in California worth maybe $1 million. Maybe they have $500,000 in equity in it, some stocks, some bonds and things like that. What's the difference between them going to probate court, letting the judge decide what to do versus playing ahead of time on their own?
So the ultimate difference is months and months of decision-making lag time, right? So the average probate, if you're lucky, is 9 months or more realistically, when real estate's involved, more like 2 years, maybe.
Average so 2 years. In LA.
Average 2 years. Versus if you decide ahead of time and have that house in a trust, the decision-making process is nearly instantaneous. And then there's the fees, right? So whatever it costs to set up a trust, wherever you get that set up and transfer your real estate over, minor cost versus the court system, statutory fees, right? So those are the initial probate fees that are within California rules that are for not only whoever is your appointed successor decision maker, right? So whoever the court has appointed to make decisions on your estate's behalf, plus the attorney gets equal fees. And those are the statutory ordinary fees, but there's always going to be what we call EXO or extraordinary fees based on hourly rates. So real estate is typical for racking up additional fees. And so if you look at the two, it can be obscene, the difference in cost from probate court costs and filing fees and all that to doing a trust your own way for just one time, setting it up. And then there is the public record, right? I think people forget about that. Probate, it's very hard to get anything sealed. So everything good, bad, and ugly is in public record. Anyone can go in online, get copies, or go into the court and get copies, versus a trust, very private, very hard to get information, and very little is ever recorded about the trust anywhere, right? So I think privacy is a big one these days.
Go back to fees for just a second. The most expensive firm I've ever seen do a a standard person's trust, with millions of dollars, not tens of millions. The most expensive I've seen, you could take the probate costs and multiply by 5, and it still won't get to what the planning ahead time would cost. It's just amazing the savings by planning ahead versus reacting afterwards in terms of the cost savings. Of course, every situation is a little different, and we all feel like, well, I can go online and do this for $1,000, but it doesn't always work out that way. It's not really at the end of the day how it works out. Let's talk about, so you talk about the savings as far as cost. We talk about the privacy. There's another part, which is really just being able to determine your own outcome.
Yeah.
If for people who don't pass, oftentimes family members are stuck trying to figure out who's in charge, and they might have different values on medical decisions and decisions of where somebody should be housed. Tell me about how an estate plan can help solve those issues ahead of time or avoid those problems.
Yeah, so when you're doing an estate plan ahead of time, you really get to think about who has a value or a common core that you have that would make distributions or utilize your assets in the way that you feel would further your interest, right? So either that can be individuals that you want to carry on distributions, it can be individuals or charities, right? If you want to leave some kind of assets to a particular charity, you can nominate the charity and how they use your funds, right? So you can, in essence, just decide who that person is and not leave it up to chance, which is really what most court processes will come down to.
Or sometimes with the best of intentions, that I've seen them nominate 2 people and those 2 people disagree, right? My son-in-law and daughter recently had our first grandchild, and they've created a plan. And they talked to us about it. I said, they wanted us, and because we live nearby, grandparents, and the other set's in New York. And I just said, to be honest, that's just a prescription for failure. Because if we disagree on anything, it's going to be a mess. And I said, you really need to think about who the one person is, and then the next in line, and the next line. Now, I'm not giving legal advice. I'm just saying, I love his parents. We get along really well now. But you don't want to add to it in the moment of stress. What school should the kids go to? Who decides that? And those seemingly small things become very big in litigation.
That's right. So just really thinking through one solid decision maker with backups, as you suggest, right? So in estate planning, maybe alternatives or backups are your best friend. Because what if you think, hey, my neighbor is a great choice for, helping out if something happens to me, and the neighbor's not available? Well, you don't want to have everyone scratching their heads like, now what do we do? You just want to have maybe kind of a list of people to go down the list, and everyone is really clear on who has the decision power, right? So whenever in my practice, we had people that said, I want to have lots of different co-decision makers. So it always makes you nervous. Like, okay, if you're going to have especially even number of decision makers, you better have a tiebreaker, because even means deadlock, and deadlock means court and litigation.
Yeah, and attorney's fees and pain and suffering. So, one of the interesting topics I know for for wealth management, wealth planning advisors like your firm, is people who come into that world needing help, oftentimes because of companies where they have stock options, right? And I know it's true in my company. I'm with eXp Realty, and we're publicly traded, and we have people who never really had a lot of wealth, and all of a sudden, stock that they gave you, years ago becomes worth substantial amounts of money. What are some of the common issues? I'm sure, and I know you have a tax background as well. What's the common issues regarding taxes and wealth and planning for people who have, let's say, stock options that they want to issue or may issue in the future?
Yeah, so stock options is an interesting area, because as you say, when clients are first issued that stock option, they might have one level of wealth, and something happens and their wealth is exponential. And so many times for those types of clients, we're talking about estate planning changes, maybe advanced tax strategies, or updating their trust or estates in general to match where they are currently in relation to estate taxes, and maybe looking at capital gains taxes and how they interplay with their trust or estate. So really it's just looking at individual clients and seeing, okay, where are you in your potential tax scenario with now the exercise option, and how do we make sure that your estate plan grows and changes to meet whatever those potential tax needs would be. So one of the beauties of having an estate plan in place versus the court system is that to the extent that you have capacity, you can make changes. So this estate plan can grow with you, change with you, be updated for the current tax laws and for the laws that might apply to your, in this case, stock options.
I know it can be an overwhelming task for people who go through life changes. Ball players are an example. One day, guy's playing high school baseball. Next thing you know, he's got a $5 million bonus that really could be life-changing money or squandered if not done properly. And the difference of taxes and how that money is treated and such is really important. How do you deal with people who maybe never had any sophisticated education? And not to knock them, they might be really smart people. They just use their smarts in their skill, but not their smarts maybe in learning about taxes and planning. How do you help people kind of grow in that process? Or is that the wealth management advisor's role, or how does that happen?
Right. So at EP Wealth, we have the advisor who will get on a call with someone on my team in the estates world and just have a healthy question and answer, walk clients through the process, whether it is creating a new estate plan and what that looks like and what documents mean and what titles mean, or walk them through a process of their concerns, maybe from their larger wealth now, trying to understand how their estate should change, and then also understand implications to their beneficiaries, right? If they start having larger wealth, now clients start to get concerned about how do we preserve that wealth and how do we utilize it properly for our children so that they will continue to be productive members of society and not just trust fund babies, for example, right? So really having a holistic Q&A session. And what we say is there's no dumb questions. Just as you suggest, clients are really smart in the area where they are practicing all the time, where they're, earning their money. But in estates, most people avoid the topic, right? Death and taxes, not the most fun topic necessarily.
Right.
And so we just really have a holistic Q&A session to really just go through and take a deep dive. What are your concerns? What keeps you up at night? And then how do we address that and talk you through it?
I went to college at USC, and I remember taking some classes with football players who later were pro, and they were completely uneducated in the field that we were in. They knew nothing about the course material, but they were very smart. I mean, to perform at that level, you have to be really intelligent, and which means you're capable of learning information. And I think for a lot of them, for years, athletes avoided these discussions and entertainers. I think more and more now you see they want to get involved in it and they want to have a little more control and input into the process. So it's really important, I think, to have a process to walk them through. Let's talk a little bit about on the tax side, creating corporations. I for most of my career thought the threshold for income was much higher than it was. And when I realized what the options were, I realized I threw away a lot of money over the years by not forming a corporate entity sooner. How do you advise people? At what point should somebody consider when they're running a business, a corporation, to help them minimize their tax liability and maximize their net profit?
Yeah, so for corporations, clients that have a routine business and they're earning an annual income over a period of years where we say, okay, this is actual, earnings, a corporation makes sense for just about most people. Sometimes in the past, we would say, in my practice, looking at $100,000 of income or more to make it worthwhile. But honestly, the threshold could be quite low. Comparatively, why? Because with a corporation that's run properly, you can have something called a small corporation or a subchapter S corporation that provides a little bit of liability protection. If you're just out there, Mr. Smith doing your business, you have personal liability issues where your house or your other assets could be at stake if there was some sort of litigation on your business, right? So you can have a small corporation. And so we've seen a lot of those, smaller businesses, people set up S corporations pretty routinely to take advantage of some litigation protections and some tax benefits. And then for real estate in California in particular, a lot of clients with investment property will put their real estate in a limited liability company, provide some protections, less onerous maybe to run than a corporation, but at the end of the day, a little bit of, tax benefit there, a little bit of write-offs, and a lot of litigation protection. So we see that in California with maybe 1 or 2 properties. So for those investors that might have a vacation home that's rented out, for example, or for small businesses, an S corporation might make sense for just about anyone. CPA will make the ultimate call on, does it make sense? Because there are some tax returns that may be filed.
So I know you have a tax background. You are an attorney. Does your firm do taxes as well, or is that something you farm out to tax companies?
Our firm does for clients that are a good fit. We'll prepare 1040, so individual returns. So part of the wealth management group at EP Wealth, not only estate planning discussions, but there's actual tax prep that happens for those individuals too. And with, additional such as business and estate tax returns to come. So constantly growing, constantly changing, and meeting the needs for clients because they all tend to integrate, right?
And I know often I'm on, as a real estate broker, I'm on the outside, sometimes looking in with a client who has a tax advisor and has separately a legal advisor and has separately a wealth advisor. And I'm trying to advise them on there's a chunk of money that there's legal issues, that there's tax issues, and it's a wealth issue we're going to do with it. And I'll hear one advisor speaking kind of, on their issues, not maybe holistically. The advantage of your firm is you guys really have a more holistic overview of the client to help them make the right decisions in those cases.
Yeah, so up to the advisor, depending on what the transaction might be, either they're looking at it from a tax perspective or some other perspective, they might pull in someone from one of the various different teams to sit on a call to answer questions because the advisor's role is narrow, right? Advising in a certain way, but they're not going to have all the different backgrounds. So it is helpful to have all the pieces of a gear involved so that when the transaction does close, they've at least thought of all these, interlocking issues.
Yeah, it's interesting because an attorney will always advise them to generally by default, avoid risk, which if you do nothing, you avoid risk. That's the ultimate avoidance. Of course, you don't make any money avoiding everything. And tax advisors will always tell you not to do anything because they will eliminate taxes. If you don't make any money, there's nothing to pay taxes on. At the end of the day, you have to do something that puts you at risk and make some money, generate some tax liability. The goal is what's the best net at the end. And it takes a multifaceted approach to those decisions. It's not just looking at it from one angle. And so it was interesting when I saw that you were at EP. I just thought it made a nice sense to kind of talk about that and share with people I'm involved with. What is the one mistake, the one financial mistake that you see even people with mid to high net worth that they make? Oops, I forgot to turn my phone off. What's the one mistake that you see most commonly among people, mid or high net worth people in their finances, that you would say, if you could go back in time, you'd like to correct in people's finances most commonly? Anything comes to mind?
I think just generically, when people have made a decision out of fear, right? So from an estate perspective, we see the estate tax law was about to change last year. So there was a lot of ebbs and flows on what the taxing authorities were going to do. And when it seems as though when people are making decisions out of fear without stopping, taking a breath and thinking about it, or going to the advisors and kind of just doing this gut reaction action, gets them into a bit of trouble, right? So if you've got someone to be a sounding board, you've got an advisory team, just sit back and reach out and take a minute. And, when I was in practice, I'd always tell clients, you've got all these different strategies. I want you to sleep on it, think about it, distance yourself a little bit, because in my practice, when we were doing litigation, a lot of people got there because they just jumped and did something without thinking. So I would say making a decision too quickly out of fear, biggest mistake.
It's so right. I think of fear or emotions. I'm in real estate, and so oftentimes we'll get an offer or counter offer or a notice from the other party, and my client wants to respond right away, and I'll say, look, they gave us 3 days to respond. let's just take one and just make sure it all sits right with you. You don't have to respond today. It's not going to change anything today or tomorrow, but sometimes things look a little different the next day than they do right now. And I think being an advisor, being able to offer people sometimes just catch your breath. We're all so busy. We're all so overwhelmed with activity. And here you say it's interesting because I wouldn't have thought that to be your answer, being an attorney and a tax advisor of a level. But I think that's the best advice I've heard in a while, which is be patient and not make decisions from fear or emotions. Well, great.
Yeah.
So April, it's been a pleasure catching up with you and talking to you a little bit. If someone wanted to, discuss in more detail some of these issues regarding legal issues in wealth management, and/or maybe get an introduction from you to somebody on your wealth management team that would help them, or an advisor to help them through, how would they reach you? What's the best way to contact you?
You could contact me via my email address, arosenberry@epwealth.com.
Fantastic. I'll put that in the description as well. And then on your website, epwealth.com is the main company website. There's all kinds of great content on there. And I see you guys have a weekly market update as well. And so you guys have a whole bunch of information. So April, thanks so much for sharing your information with us today, your legal insights and your tax insights, and I think most importantly, your wealth insights. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.